Thanks to the both of you for joining us. So, Nicole, let me ask you, anything about this testimony from the brother really stand out to you?
I feel like it helped the Durst case. Some of what the prosecution was trying to present as potential motive, for example, turns out to not make any sense at all. So I found this to be helpful testimony for the defense.
Well, it's interesting, though, because the brother, recalled the story about how he claims Robert Durst, wanted him dead. So what do you think, Neama Rahmani, in terms of this testimony? Is this witness credible? I mean, he is the brother of the defendant.
Derek, I like this testimony for the district attorney's office and the state. I thought it was helpful. It helps the theme here that Robert Durst is someone who is violent, is prone to violence, someone who is a little bit quirky and, doesn't really play by the rules and breaks the law. And, and frankly, someone who was written out of his family's inheritance because of his conduct. And I also like the testimony relating to the disappearance of Kathy Durst. You're a loving husband and you're not abusive, and your wife disappears. I think jurors are going to expect Robert Durst or whomever to act differently, not the way that Durst did, the sort of nonchalant, not caring after his wife had disappeared for days. These types of cases, jurors look for the clues, right? You can't really get in someone's head, but I know we're obviously covering Durst, but another important case that we're covering on Law and Crime is the Redwine case and, Mark Redwine and how he reacted when his son disappeared. Is that type of behavior consistent with someone, a young child walking out the door, or in the Durst case, with someone's wife getting on a train and, not being anywhere to be found? So I think this is helpful. It's not a smoking gun or anything, but this is a very circumstantial case that the state's going to build over the next 5 months. And this type of testimony where someone is weird, someone is quirky, someone's potentially violent, and someone doesn't care when his wife is nowhere to be found and he doesn't know where she is. Again, I think it's just one piece of the puzzle for the prosecution, and it does help.
Yeah, and even damaged here? I mean, how does that go to the crux of the case?
Derek, I agree with Nicole. The defense scored some points here. Everyone knows someone who is affected by autism or Asperger's, someone who's on the spectrum. And, obviously I'm not a medical provider, but it's clear that, Durst is strange, exhibits some different types of behavior. And I like how the defense sort of took that and they embraced it and they ran with it. But one really important piece of Douglas's testimony that we still haven't talked about is, let's not forget, he said that Kathy told him being Douglas, that she wanted to divorce Bob, and that's a motive for murder.
If drug use is being brought up, it seems like the defense is almost fixated on this. I mean, there's been a lot of testimony to this effect, but is it really going anywhere?
Derek, you and I have heard more about drugs these past several weeks than I have my entire life. Last week it was LSD and acid. This week it's, Quaaludes. But this is a big defense theory here that, like Nicole said, Kathy Durst is unstable. She's unpredictable. Her disappearance, even though now it's been ruled, at least that she's dead, she just may have disappeared off the face of the earth. Gone Girl before there was Gone Girl. And a lot of the state's theory of the case was that there's no way that Kathy would have called out on the first day of her internship. So, the fact that the defense is focused on this drug use really does play into their theory of the case.
And criminal defense attorney Nicole DeBoard. Neama, this line of questioning about attorney-client privilege, whether Stuart Altman was acting as a friend or as an attorney in talking to various entities, what do you make of that?
Derek, really fascinating testimony here. Not only is this a close childhood friend of Bob Durst going back to high school, this is his attorney, and he even helped with the Morris Black case. So Lewin's trying to make sure that the testimony that comes out is obviously not privileged. So that's why you hear a lot about, what's public, what's attorney-client privilege, what's confidential, and what's not. But really, the main reason he's here is not for his testimony, which is useful, but Emily Altman's testimony, which we heard last week. And remember, she's the one that put Bob Durst in Los Angeles when Susan Berman was killed, but then she backtracked and pulled that back after talking to her husband and attorney Stewart.
Right. Really become an issue, right? I mean, he's a friend and also a former attorney. That suggests a relationship that maybe might be more under the microscope.
No question. And when Altman testified, he said to John Lewin, you realize that I'm Bob Durst's attorney and I'm not unbiased, right? So,
Yeah.
if I were the
So
prosecution, I would get in and out a little bit faster.
Federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani here to help me sort through the testimony of this witness. Neama, what struck me is the amount of time Prosecutor Lewin is spending with this witness trying to parse the attorney-client privilege, whether this, friend and former attorney of Bob Durst maybe, is not credible, or maybe, is not the kind of witness who's telling the truth.
And Derek, right before our last break at the top of the hour, to the bottom of the hour, excuse me, we were talking about this testimony. And Emily Altman, not only is it Stewart's wife, but also an employee of the law practice. So I think what John Lewin is trying to do is really lock in that testimony about where Durst was when Susan Berman was killed. And, obviously Emily was speaking to reporters, and we heard about this shows how long ago it was, because these shows probably aren't even around anymore, like 48 Hours and those types of shows. But she's apparently giving these interviews, and Lewin wants to establish that these are not privileged. She is giving statements to third parties, including reporters. These are outside of the privilege, and therefore when she was telling them that Bob was in Los Angeles, on Christmas Eve when Susan Berman was killed, her body was found, that she was being credible then, and she only changed her testimony later at the direction of her husband, Stewart.
The deterioration of Robert Durst, appearing in court, frail, obviously aging, but also a lot was made about his urine bag and him holding it up in court. The implication being that maybe he's trying to gain some sympathy among the jurors. Do you think that's the case, Neama, or is he, legitimately not well?
And Derek, I think it's both. This is Hollywood, my hometown of Los Angeles, and I do think that Robert Durst is indeed in bad health. We've seen it before our eyes, just from the time that we started this trial, right before the pandemic. Obviously, we took that 14, 15-month gap, but his physical condition, just to a layperson and observer, has deteriorated significantly. And I know we've done the side-by-sides here on Law and Crime, but just in a span of a little over a year, he is indeed in poor health. But just like we saw in the Harvey Weinstein case, the defense is going to do a good job of trying to get the jury's sympathy. That's their job. And they want to have these jurors believe that this is someone who's old and frail and who's incapable of committing these murders, notwithstanding the fact that they happened allegedly at least decades ago.
You see Prosecutor Lewin really trying to pinpoint Emily Altman as someone who maybe not be revealing all about what she knows, about what contact she had with Robert Durst before she gave an interview to Dateline.
Yeah, Derek, no question. This Dateline interview is good for the prosecution. In it, Emily Altman says that she's living a nightmare, and now she's coming to grips with reality, and she is coming to believe that Bob Durst may have killed Kathy. That's a very important statement, essentially. I'm paraphrasing it, that she gives in that Dateline interview. And obviously, her testimony has changed and shifted over time, so the prosecution really needs to focus on that. And same thing with the original statements that he was in Los Angeles, because, again, that testimony has shifted, and Lewin has to deal with the problem of having a plane ticket that left from San Francisco shortly after Susan Berman was killed. That's good evidence for the defense, essentially an alibi. So he needs to focus on those original prior statements before, again, they were allegedly tainted because of her husband, Stewart, who was an attorney representing Bob.
Obviously, Durst, has this bag for a reason. He's, under a doctor's care. So Neama Rahmani, it can't be that it's all for show, right? It has to be legitimately emptied, despite, the uncomfortable nature of it, at least being shown in court.
Well, I'm sure it does have to be empty, and we've learned many things during this trial. We've learned about drugs, and we've also learned about catheters and urine bags, and the fact that John Lewin apparently had one of these and knows how to empty it. It was really surreal to see him do it the first time. We thought that would be the one time and it would be the end of it, but now we know this issue with this urine bag is going to be something that we're going to be dealing with throughout the trial. I can't imagine what the judge is thinking having to deal with these medical issues because the defense has said that they're not going to do it. John Lewin has offered to do it, and Durst doesn't want, and that's certainly his right. So I don't know where we're going to end up on this because it's really uncharted territory.
Testimony's being allowed, even though Durst was acquitted of the murder. So in a sense, it does muddy the waters in terms of the reputation of Robert Durst. You know, his reputation being what it is. But, you know, hearing this testimony, do you think it sways the jury?
Derek, I don't know if Robert Durst's reputation can get any worse, but, you know, I agree with Nicole on this one. They're certainly trying to dirty up Durst more than they possibly can. And really, it's this judge. I mean, anything goes. You know, we're talking about a murder that's been adjudicated. He's been found not guilty. We're going to see parts of the Jinx, which is arguably a documentary. We might see the whole thing. You know, we're going to see, you know, All Good Things, which is admittedly a movie, a fictional one. So really, when it comes to this particular case and this particular judge, anything goes. It's all coming in. But look, this is a very tough case for the prosecution. We've spent time talking about two murders, right? Obviously, the one that's charged in this case, Susan Berman, but also Kathy Durst. But there's the third murder of Morris Black, and that's coming in little by little. And arguably, that's the easiest case for the prosecution to have proved. You know, Bob Durst admitted to chopping up his neighbor, throwing the body parts into the Gulf of Mexico where they were found, and he got off on that particular case. So these two, or at least Susan Berman, is going to be much more challenging. So you got to be concerned if you're the state here.
Right. A demeanor that may not be overly emotional. Does that mean you committed a murder?
It doesn't, but again, jurors expect someone who's a loving parent to act a certain way when their child disappears, even if it's, you know, not someone who's living with you full time. That is your biological son you have a relationship with. And, you know, whether you're at Walmart and we saw that surveillance video, or you pick him up from the airport, or you report him missing, people that care about their children, they're expected to act a certain way. And this is all circumstantial evidence, right? We cannot get into Mark's head to know what he was thinking, but folks that are really concerned, they want to find their children, they didn't murder them, dismember them, cut off their skull, they act differently than Mark Redwine did here.
Mark Redwine appeared calm, showing not a lot of concern over the disappearance of his son. And then also, initially, the sergeant did not write a report, he says, because Mark Redwine didn't want a report written. What do you make of that, Neama Rahmani?
Again, it goes to the state's theory of the case here in Colorado, that, you know, here's a father who did not like his son and, you know, reacted when his son found these, you know, very sort of strange, to put them mildly, pictures on his computer. He lost it, and, you know, he just didn't have that loving relationship that is typical for a father and son. So all plays into the state's theme in this case with respect to motive, means, and opportunity. Obviously, you have your physical evidence in the blood. He's the last person to see Dylan. But this is all good evidence and good testimony for the prosecution, in my opinion, because these are things the jury is not going to like.
We talked a little bit about this before, but does this witness help or hurt the prosecution or the defense? I mean, which side does he benefit?
I think it helps the prosecution. And again, this is the person who received the report from Mark about his missing son, and the observations he made were someone who really didn't appear particularly concerned, wasn't really interested in searching for, and this is based on some of the other witnesses who've testified in the case so far, wasn't particularly interested in participating in the search for his missing son. This is all good evidence for the state, in my opinion.
Right, hard to get past that kind of testimony for sure. So this witness in the case overall.
I like this witness for the state. Not only did he show that Mark was devoid of emotion, there was the issue of something for the dogs, the scent item, you know, and Mark was not really helpful in providing any items. You know, I know his son was just visiting, ultimately said he was sleeping on the couch, provided a pillow. The law enforcement believes that it wasn't even his pillow. So you're seeing a father who is not helping law enforcement search for his missing son, and the logical conclusion there is because he was involved in his murder.
Right, something you would expect a father to do is be involved at least in the search for his son.
Yeah, I agree with Nicole. You know, you have that blood there. You know, the defense theory of the case is that Dylan just wandered off, and that's what they said in their opening. Going to be really tough to prove, that a 12-year-old boy, 12 or 13-year-olds with a cell phone, who's supposed to see his friend the next morning at 6:30, just wandered off and disappeared. And especially when at least the physical evidence of blood and blunt force trauma is there. So it's going to be tough for the defense here.